CNN's Donnie O'Sullivan got in the cage with former UFC star turned podcaster Jake Shields to explore the Manosphere and why exactly it's so popular.
They speak liberal, they have liberal friends, and then they go online and they are a white supremacist.
This is Vera Papasova. She spent the last year dating far-right men in New York City for a story for Cosmopolitan magazine.
They're the most insecure men I've ever sat down with. It was really difficult to have some of these dates because they were so insecure, because they don't really know who they are and they don't know how to figure that out.
She said the men she dated got all their news and information from the so-called Manosphere.
They did not listen to anything else. They're only listening to independent media, and they're only listening to men talking to men.
The Manosphere is made up of macho podcasters and influencers.
There's no such thing as an independent female.
Most women have zero concept of like money.
Females don't have independent thought.
It's a space where you...
This is amazing. Isn't it crazy how they're trying to demonize men and then they frame it as a manosphere? Now, for those that may not be familiar, there's different groups of men, and a lot of times they separate themselves based off of their socioeconomic status and their race, right? And so, for example, my guy O'Shea Duke Jackson, he may speak from the lens of the black manosphere, right? But it also is a whole nother group of men that is on the white side and an Asian side. So men in Western culture are having difficulty with women based off of feminism and feminist views that then promote women being above men. And that's why you see a lot of times women then say they want a partner instead of saying they want a husband. They're going away from traditional views, but they're still forcing men to accept their hand in marriage, or trying to force men to accept their hands in marriage. And so that's why they then have this narrative or this view to say that men are insecure and all of this other type of stuff. But see, you also have to have somebody go into it objective, right? Now, I don't consider myself as a part of a manosphere or to be a part of the red pill space or whatever, but I do speak ideologically based off of the fact that the truth is the truth regardless of whether or not you agree with it or not. And I don't even divide myself based off of any group. I rock with everybody, but my principles and my views are my views. But I also understand that men are revolting and rejecting the way that we're operating in society. And so then you'll have somebody that I'm assuming based off of the narrative and the rhetoric that she speaks of, because she don't speak objectively, she's speaking from the lens of somebody that is jaded, that leans hard into feminism. So I'm not even sure that she's the best person for this, but let's go ahead and get into it because I'm curious as to what she's going to see. I'm reacting to this in real time, right? I'm sure she's going to give some additional context, but I want to see what she's going to say.
UFC fighters are among those who reign supreme.
They love the UFC guys. They love the MMA guys because those guys do what they can. They're modern gladiators. They're badass.
Badass like Jake Shields, a former UFC star turned podcaster.
Sorry. Now I'm starting to feel nervous. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, of course.
Who I met at an MMA gym in Las Vegas.
Like all great MMA pros. I've never hit anyone in my life.
I'm not punching back. Hit me. No, I sit right here. KO.
This is CNN. Do you miss being full-time pro, like in terms of?
You know, of course I miss it. To go from professional athlete, which is the highest of highs, to retirement.
And I guess the
podcast has helped. You could fall into depression if you just go from the most amazing career where you're famous and spotlights to all of a sudden you're a nobody.
Sure.
Like other podcasters in the Manosphere, Jake regularly hosts controversial guests.
And I named the podcast Fighting Back. I feel like we have to fight back what we're told we're allowed to do. I just don't like to be told you're not allowed to talk to this person. Like, why can't I talk to him? I'm not saying I agree with his ideology, but I should hear what he has to say.
He's hosted the former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan.
Today I have a very, very special guest, Dr. David Duke. I know you're controversial, but I had no idea how controversial.
And Thomas Russo, the leader of the white supremacist group Patriot Front.
It Let's go where we disagree a little bit.
Yes, sure.
Let's hit race, because you're a white-only group?
So the organization only allows people of American ethnicity, and all Americans, I believe, come from Europe, so they're white.
The true heirs of the American spirit fight on!
Yeah, no, I understand and talk to these guys, but I've also not brought anyone hateful. If I do, I'm going to be really, really on top of them.
But so
Why are they framing it? Do you see how CNN moves? CNN is such a slimy news show because they're prefacing having this conversation because first, it goes from, hey, I dated everybody inside of the Manosphere, or I dated for an entire year, so many different guys in the Manosphere, and they're all extremists and racists. Like, don't you know that there's men from different demographics that consider themselves traditional men, or they've understood the realities of what it's like to operate as a man in society, including dating, resources, going to school, all of this stuff. And so now that they have a microphone to have a conversations, which all of them don't necessarily have to agree, and they come from different backgrounds, but they're trying to frame this like, yo, these guys are, super extremists and are far right, and anybody that is a part of anything that champions masculinity, they're going to be angry. And, it's like it's a slanted point of view, and the editing is so crazy, bro.
you saying that you haven't brought someone hateful on, right? People say, well, you brought on the Grand Wizard of the KKK, you brought on Patriot Front.
Yeah.
They're hateful.
No, I think those are excellent questions, but if people go and watch the actual interviews, I think they would be like, oh, this guy's not near as hateful as if I expected.
But Vera says hate isn't what the men she dated were really looking for.
One of these guys brought me to a political meeting.
And did they talk about politics?
Barely. They talked about, it was a bunch of men complaining about girlfriends and wives, regurgitating Andrew Tate type of advice about how to train your girlfriend, how to train your wife to be submissive. And so this group was supposed to be a political group, but they're talking about relationship problems. And the fact that that's what most of the time was spent on, you don't need to be a neo-Nazi. You need therapy.
So she doesn't like the fact that guys connect with guys that have a similar view from a political perspective, get together, but they're also talking about the dynamics, intersexual dynamics, and how probably feminism is affecting what happens today inside of the United States of America, and how that is then also influencing what we probably doing on the political spectrum. See, I'm objectively intelligent enough, not the most intelligent person in the world, but I'm objectively intelligent enough to be able to see through the bullshit and actually call a spade a spade. And I know what's really going on, so it's hard for them to spin it on somebody like me. But see, a woman will look at this and they'll look at this as political research and journalism, and then they'll make an informed decision and say, oh, see, this is how all guys are, and see, they actually hate women, but they don't. We love women. And they try to frame this to make you look bad, but it's crazy, but this is why you have a gender war.
The appeal of Jake's podcast speaks to a need among young men in this country that Vera says can't be ignored.
You have to incentivize someone to want to be better. You can't just say, let's make men better. The thing about these guys is their biggest support system is online, but that also is very isolating, and isolation is what breeds hatred.
Groups like Patriot Front offer community, but community based on racism and hate.
People have to really think about, do you have the capacity to talk to people that you don't agree with? Because that one nice conversation you might have might change someone's day enough to not have to seek out help in an online support group, which is actually a bunch of white supremacists using political beliefs as an excuse for how they feel.
Donnie O'Sullivan is here with us now. Donnie, I'm so glad you've done this special. There's so much intrigue around this issue of the Manosphere. And in fact, Trump is going to the UFC tonight. How big of a role does the sport play in the Manosphere?
Hey, Isabel. Yeah, and look, we should point out at the start here, there's tons of guys who are fans, and some women as well, who are fans of the UFC. I have many friends who are fans of the UFC. It certainly does not mean, that if you are a fan of the UFC, you are falling sort of down this rabbit hole of hate and white supremacy and everything else. But what we are seeing is that there is this sort of this crossover. The UFC is playing a greater and bigger role, really, in American life. Joe Rogan, who's the world's biggest podcaster, is a UFC commentator. Dana White, who is the founder of the UFC, is a prominent Trump supporter and was recently appointed to the board of Meta by Mark Zuckerberg himself, another big MMA and UFC fan. And actually fighting tonight in Miami, Trump is going to the event. We're not sure if he'll be there for the earlier fights, but fighting tonight in Miami at the UFC event is a fighter by the name of Bryce Mitchell, who recently set up a podcast of his own, and on his debut episode a few months ago, he said that Hitler was a quote-unquote good guy or a great guy. Dana White, the head of the UFC, was quick to condemn that, but you can just kind of see there where folks who might be coming into this sport for one reason are a fan of fighting, and then they're getting exposed to views like.
Yeah, it's so funny because, again, I don't see anything wrong with actually watching a sport and embracing masculinity. I'm not necessarily a big fan of the UFC. I don't mind watching the UFC, but I mean, it's just like, sports is for men, but they feminize so much. I don't know. I'm not going to get into it. I want to hear what y'all got to say. Make sure y'all tap into the Patreon. Link is in the description. You heard what I had to say. Make sure y'all tap into the Patreon. Also, T. Hanley, 40% off your first order, 20% off for life. I love you. I appreciate you. Let me know what y'all think inside of the comments.